The village woke each morning to two different sounds. On one side, ancestral drums beat softly from the elders' compound, calling spirits, history, and memory to attention. On the other side, iron gates slid open with a cold metallic groan, allowing luxury cars to glide out like proud cattle polished for display. Dust from old footpaths mixed with the shine of glass windows. Here, tradition and modern wealth did not greet each other as friends. They simply shared the same land and pretended not to argue. Children ran barefoot past mansions taller than their grandparents' huts. Old women tied wrappers and whispered prayers while staring at houses with electric fences. At night, the moon shone equally on shrines and swimming pools. People said the village had one sun, but two hearts. At the center of it all stood the elders' compound and the billionaire's mansion, facing the same sky. The elders sat on carved stools, their voices slow and heavy with wisdom. Not far away, the mansion rose like a stubborn hill, guarded by cameras and men in black suits. The elders spoke for the ancestors. The mansion spoke with money. And though neither bowed to the other, both demanded respect. "When gold begins to speak," one elder once muttered, tapping his staff into the earth, "even truth must clear its throat." Wealth ruled the village like an invisible chief. It opened mouths and closed others. People lowered their voices when the billionaire's name was mentioned. Shopkeepers smiled too quickly. Relatives nodded too deeply. Money had taught them fear disguised as respect. And where wealth shines too bright, envy learns how to walk without shoes. Gossip traveled faster than truth. Praise was often mixed with bitterness. Some admired the success. Others prayed quietly for its fall. In this village, love and hatred often shared the same greeting. The man at the center of every whisper was the billionaire himself. He had once been a barefoot boy, carrying firewood with cracked palms and empty pockets. He knew hunger. He knew shame. And he swore never to kneel before poverty again. Years later, gold watches wrapped his wrist, and his name crossed borders. The village called him a miracle. But miracles often grow roots that crack the ground beneath them. People compared him to a baobab tree, wide, strong, impossible to ignore. He gave shade to many, yes. But beneath his branches, little sunlight survived. His strength fed the village, yet his shadow swallowed his home. To the public, he was generous. He paid school fees. He donated during festivals. He shook hands and smiled for cameras. Inside his house, his voice ruled like law. "Order is love," he often said. "A house without fear collapses." His family listened. Not because they agreed, but because they depended. Love did not hold them together. Wealth did. Fear did. And the unspoken knowledge that without him, everything they enjoyed could vanish like smoke at dawn. Above them all, the baobab stood, alive, towering, and unaware that even the strongest tree can one day be mistaken for fallen. Behind the tall gates and polished walls, the family lived with smiles carefully arranged like masks worn for festivals. The first wife sat most evenings on the edge of the veranda, her wrapper neatly folded, her back straight. Years had passed since anyone asked how her heart felt. She had learned the strength of silence. Waiting had carved lines into her face deeper than age ever could. When the billionaire passed her, she greeted him softly. "You have returned," she would say. He would nod, already thinking of numbers and meetings. When he left again, her eyes followed him only halfway. Hope had tired of walking that road. The second wife moved differently. Youth still clung to her steps, and ambition burned quietly behind her eyes. She smiled often, but her smile was sharp. In her room, she stared at mirrors longer than necessary, measuring herself against the first wife's years and position. "This house listens only to power," she once whispered to her maid. "And power does not come with patience." Between the wives, words were polite. Glances were not. Each greeting carried weight. Each silence carried warning. The children grew like crops fed with money but denied rain. Their rooms were full, but their hearts were hollow. Brothers watched brothers with suspicion. Sisters measured love by gifts. When their father entered, they straightened like soldiers. When he left, their laughter returned, but it was loud and empty. "Father never listens," one son muttered once. "He listens," another replied bitterly. "Just not to us." Before the world, The family walked together. They smiled for visitors. They sat close during celebrations. But inside, fear of inheritance hung like smoke. Each wondered, who will be chosen? Who will be forgotten? Then came the night when everything shifted. The billionaire stood to speak after dinner. His words never arrived. His hand clutched his chest, and the baobab trembled. He fell. "Call the doctor!" someone shouted. That night stretched longer than the village road. Machines beeped. Breaths were counted. Prayers were whispered and bargained. Dawn crept in slowly, afraid to look. When the doctor finally spoke, his voice was low. "I am sorry," he said. "He is gone." Time froze. Cries rose instantly. Wrappers were pulled tight. Faces twisted in grief. But beneath the tears, something else moved, quiet, shameful, and alive. Relief. And somewhere in the shadows, fate listened, patient as the earth itself. Black cloth covered their bodies, but it did not cover their hearts. From the courtyard to the wide sitting room, the family moved slowly, heads bowed, voices low. Women wailed in the traditional way, their cries rising and falling like practiced songs. Men shook their heads and sighed deeply. Anyone watching would swear this was a house drowning in sorrow. But behind lowered lashes and trembling lips, something else lived. Inside chests, laughter stirred. Not loud. Not proud. Buried deep, like a secret seed. The first wife wiped her eyes with the edge of her wrapper. Her shoulders shook, but her tears were thin. For years she had lived under rules that never bent. Now, as she sat among mourners, a strange lightness touched her chest. "It is finished," she whispered to herself, then quickly coughed, afraid her thoughts might escape. The second wife cried louder than all. She threw herself on the floor, beating her chest. "Oh, my husband!" she cried. "Who will protect us now?" Yet between her cries, her eyes opened briefly, sharp and alert, scanning the room. She noticed who sat where, who spoke to which elder, who avoided whose gaze. These tears were for the village, not for the dead. Outside, neighbors gathered. Elders nodded in approval at the show of grief. "They loved him," one woman murmured. "Yes," another replied. "You can see it in their tears." If only tears told the truth. That night, when the lamps burned low and visitors left, the house breathed differently. No heavy footsteps echoed through the halls. No booming voice called for silence. Doors closed softly, not in fear, but in relief. One son leaned against the wall and laughed under his breath. "For the first time," he said quietly, "I can sleep without dreaming of his anger." Another nodded. "The roof still stands," he replied. "But the thunder is gone." In the women's rooms, whispers replaced cries. "How many houses are there?" one voice asked. "And the companies?" another replied. "Who controls them now?" Hands that had wiped tears now counted invisible riches. Minds traveled faster than mourning drums, moving from grief to gold. The body had not yet grown cold, but plans were already warm. Yet the night wind moved strangely through the compound. It rattled the old trees and brushed against windows like restless fingers. Somewhere near the shrine, a clay pot cracked with a soft, sharp sound. An old aunt paused and looked toward the darkness. "The spirits do not sleep," she muttered. No one answered her. By morning, the sons walked through the house with new eyes. One stopped near the main hall and measured the space with his steps. "This would make a fine office," he said casually. Another smiled. "Father always said this wing was mine." In the kitchen, the wives passed each other with polite greetings. "You cried well yesterday," the second wife said sweetly. "So did you," the first replied. Their smiles did not reach their eyes. Old jealousies, once chained by fear, now stretched and stood tall. Words stayed gentle, but looks cut deep. Every greeting carried a question. Every silence carried a threat. At breakfast, plates clinked. No one spoke of the dead. They spoke of repairs, of meetings, of visitors who must be seen. The house had become quiet, but not peaceful. It was the silence of hunters watching each other in tall grass. A battlefield without noise. A home divided by hunger for power. Above them all, the spirits watched. The ancestors listened. And the earth, patient and wide, waited for the truth to finish walking its slow, careful path. Ink began to move even as the morning drums still echoed faintly in the distance. Before the dust from visitors' feet had settled, papers appeared on polished tables. Files were opened. Pens clicked. A nephew who had never visited without invitation now arrived early each morning, briefcase in hand. "We must protect the family," he said smoothly. "These things cannot wait." No one asked which family he meant. Signatures were discussed in whispers. Phone calls were made behind closed doors. The dead man's name traveled from mouth to mouth, not with love, but with urgency. In this house, ink now ran faster than tears. Soon, elders were invited, not to mourn, but to dine. Goats were slaughtered. Palm wine flowed freely. Soft laughter filled the compound as respected men were seated on mats and given gifts wrapped in bright cloth. "You have carried wisdom longer than we have carried money," one son said, bowing low as he placed an envelope gently beside an elder's knee. The elder's eyes flicked toward it. He did not touch it, but he did not push it away either. "Tradition must guide us," the son continued. "But tradition must also understand urgency." Some elders nodded slowly. Others shifted uncomfortably. Sweet words were poured like honey, covering sharp intentions beneath. Soon, the will became the most dangerous object in the house. Its name was spoken with caution. Its location was guessed at. Each person imagined a different ending written inside it. "What if he changed it?" one daughter asked in a hushed voice. "He wouldn't dare," her brother replied. "I was his favorite." Fear crept between them. So did suspicion. Relatives visited who had never called before. Everyone claimed closeness. Everyone feared exclusion. The will, unseen, cut deeper than spears ever could. Then came the decision to bury quickly. "The longer we wait, the more problems will come," a cousin insisted. "The body must return to the earth," another added. "It is tradition." But the elders exchanged glances. The mourning days were not complete. The rites were not finished. Still, preparations rushed forward. Questions were buried before answers could breathe. The dead man was being lowered into the ground not just to honor him, but to silence doubt. That night, the ancestors began to speak. A clay pot near the shrine cracked clean down its side without being touched. The night wind returned, restless, circling the compound again and again. One elder woke suddenly, his heart pounding. "This house is leaning," he whispered to his wife. "The spirits are uneasy." At the hospital, far from chants and rituals, a young doctor stared at a chart longer than he should have. Something did not sit well. He checked the numbers again. The heart readings. The timing. The response. "This is strange," he murmured. He brought the file to a senior nurse. "Have you noticed this?" he asked quietly. She glanced at it, then looked away. "Be careful," she warned. "This family carries weight." Still, doubt refused to leave him. The numbers did not agree with death. They argued softly, like children insisting on truth. He brought the matter to a closed room where older doctors spoke in lowered voices. "We will review it," one said. Quietly. No names were mentioned. No calls were made. Power has a way of making hospitals whisper. As burial plans moved forward, science knocked gently on the door of the grave. The young doctor stood alone for a moment, staring at his hands. "If we are wrong," he thought, "then the earth is being asked to keep a man who is not ready." Outside, the village prepared for burial. Inside, fate adjusted its grip. And somewhere between the ancestors and the machines, truth waited for its moment to rise. Laughter slipped out where silence should have lived. In a corner of the compound, two young boys nudged each other and smirked as elders passed by. One covered his mouth, but his shoulders shook. "Now he cannot shout at us any more," one whispered. "Now the house is ours," the other replied, grinning. Their words floated carelessly, landing on the ears of an old aunt who froze where she stood. She looked at them, her eyes heavy with disappointment. "Do you laugh at thunder after it strikes?" she asked softly. The boys fell quiet, but the damage had already been done. Respect had cracked, just like the clay pot by the shrine. Inside, the wives sat together, wrapped in mourning cloth. Their faces were calm, their voices gentle. But their minds were busy building invisible thrones. "The elders will listen to wisdom," the first wife said slowly. "Yes," the second wife replied with a thin smile. "And wisdom favors strength." They spoke of arrangements, of rooms, of influence. Their tears had dried, replaced by careful plans. Grief had stepped aside, making room for ambition. Nearby, a table was covered with papers. Lists were drawn. Houses, lands, companies, each item spoken aloud like beads counted on a string. "This one is worth more," a son said. "And this belongs to me," another replied sharply. No one spoke of the man who had built it all. His laughter, his anger, his sacrifices. His humanity was folded away, replaced by numbers and ink. A whole life reduced to property lines. The house felt different now. The walls still stood, but warmth had left. The air was thick and cold. Footsteps echoed longer than before. Even the portraits on the walls seemed to watch in silence, ashamed. The home that once breathed pride now breathed unease. Outside, burial preparations continued. The ground had been chosen. The cloth prepared. The drums waited patiently. The earth was ready. But the truth was not. As elders gathered and final words were being arranged, a hurried figure pushed through the crowd. A young doctor, breathless, eyes wide. "Please," he called out. "Stop." The drums fell silent. Heads turned. Murmurs spread like fire in dry grass. "This is sacred time," an elder warned. "Why do you interrupt the dead?" The doctor swallowed hard. "Because the dead may not be dead." Confusion rippled through the gathering. "What are you saying?" someone demanded. The doctor's voice shook, but he stood firm. "There was a mistake. We reviewed the records. The signs, they do not agree with death." The world seemed to tilt. Then the words came, heavy and unstoppable. "He is alive." It was as if thunder struck without rain. A wail rose and died in the same breath. A woman staggered back. A man dropped to his knees. Faces drained of color. Mouths opened, but no sound followed. "No," the second wife whispered. "That is impossible," a son said, shaking his head. "Impossible." But fear had already replaced greed. Secret smiles turned to trembling lips. Plans shattered in silence. Celebration burned to ash on the tongue. Some looked toward the ground, afraid it had heard too much. Others stared at the sky, wondering if the ancestors were laughing or judging. The drums did not resume. They waited. And in that heavy pause, every heart knew the truth. When the earth refuses to receive a body, it is because justice is not finished walking. Eyes widened. Hands froze. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Each family member felt the weight of their own choices pressing on their chest. Greed, once warm and comforting, now recoiled under a heavier shadow. Thoughts of inheritance, of lands and money, shrank as shame crept inside. "What have we done?" a daughter whispered, voice trembling. "We were wrong," murmured her brother. "All of it. Every plan, every lie." No one spoke of the patriarch yet, but his presence lingered like a heavy drumbeat in their hearts. Faces reflected judgment, imagined eyes of the village watching, judging, remembering. Wealth that had seemed so certain slipped from their minds. The excitement of assets and rooms, of titles and power, faded under a new reality, exposure. Humiliation before neighbors, scorn whispered along market streets. The air tasted bitter. Some closed their ears, shaking their heads. "It cannot be true," one muttered. "Perhaps the doctor lied. Perhaps it is the wind playing tricks." Denial became a shield, offering temporary refuge from guilt. Others could not escape. Their knees trembled, their palms sweated, their eyes darted toward the shrine, feeling the ancestors' gaze heavy upon them. "They see everything," an elder murmured, stepping closer. "Do you hear them? The spirits do not forgive lightly." Then the door opened slowly. A shadow moved inside. At first, they thought it was a servant. Then, slowly, unmistakably, he came forward, alive, weak, yet unmistakable. The billionaire. He looked older, thinner, each step careful, but the strength behind his gaze remained unbroken. His presence filled the room like the roots of a baobab tree reaching deep beneath the earth, steady, patient, enduring. He paused, observing. No accusation. No words. Just eyes that had seen everything, the smiles, the whispers, the secret calculations. Every betrayal exposed without a single confession. Silence stretched. Louder than any shout, his quiet demanded attention. The children lowered their heads. The wives straightened in their mourning cloth, unsure if tears could save them. Finally, he moved to the center of the hall. A single leaf fell from a nearby branch, carried by a soft wind, landing near his foot. "Even the dead tree may sprout again," he said softly, voice like the whisper of old forests. "Even when you believe the earth has claimed me, fate does not forget." The family trembled. Not for wealth. Not for inheritance. But for justice long delayed, now returning as sure as dawn over the village. Every heart knew in that moment. The patriarch was alive, the reckoning had begun, and no secret could remain buried. Eyes dropped. Shoulders slumped. Every gaze avoided the man who had been thought gone. They could not meet him, could not speak, for their own hearts betrayed them. The weight of unspoken deeds pressed down heavier than any drum, heavier than the mourning cloth that clung to their shoulders. "Look at them," an elder whispered, voice barely above the rustle of the wind. "See the guilt they carry." Nearby, the healers and wise elders stood as witnesses. They had seen life, death, and the spaces between. Tradition and medicine alike observed silently, noting the truths that words dared not name. One healer touched his heart and shook his head. "The spirits are patient," he murmured. "But patience is not forever." The father moved slowly through the room. His eyes, once feared, now saw more than anger. They read the story written on every face. A daughter who had whispered about property, a son who had measured rooms in anticipation, the wives who had plotted behind veils of mourning. Each thought, each betrayal, was clear. No confession, no speech, could hide it. The silence grew heavier, pregnant with justice yet unspoken. It hung like the sky before a storm, dense and waiting. No thunder, no words, yet every heart knew what was coming. Justice hovered, invisible but undeniable, touching each guilty soul. At last, the patriarch turned, stepping back to a corner where shadows softened his frame. He exhaled slowly, eyes distant, reflecting on what wealth had built, and what it had broken. The family had been bound not by love, but by chains of gold. "No chains need break today," he said softly. "The heart alone teaches the deepest lesson." Faces paled. Privilege and power slipped away silently. Those who had celebrated too soon now bowed in stillness, weighed down by the truth of their own hearts. And in that hush, the house itself seemed to inhale and remember, that which is built without love cannot endure untested. Some shoulders sagged, bowed not by age but by conscience. Faces that had schemed and whispered now softened with sincerity. A daughter, who had counted rooms in her father's house while he lay in silence, pressed her hands together and whispered, "Father, forgive me. I see now what I have done." A son, usually brash and confident, sat alone by the window, the sun casting long shadows across the floor. He could not look at anyone, not the elders, not his siblings, not even the patriarch himself. Shame had built walls around him that no laughter or wealth could breach. "I thought I knew the path," he muttered. "But I have only walked in darkness." Tears fell quietly, washing away pride, not for show but for cleansing. These were not the ceremonial tears of mourning, nor the eyes wet with public expectation. These were the tears that spoke of regret, of understanding that life and love cannot be bought, measured, or inherited. The patriarch observed, eyes softening. "Your inheritance is not the gold you coveted," he said slowly, voice steady as the river in flood. "It is the character you leave behind, the hearts you have not broken, the truth you uphold when no one watches." Elders now stepped forward, their voices calm but carrying weight older than stone. "Greed blinds. Death listens. Life remembers," one intoned, letting the words settle like rain on parched earth. The family bowed their heads, acknowledging forces greater than themselves. They understood that wealth alone cannot command respect or mend hearts. At last, the patriarch moved through the compound, distributing aid, food, and resources to the villagers. The gold that had once bound the family in fear now returned to the hands of the people, healing not just the village, but the fractured hearts of those who had learned, at last, that legacy is measured in kindness, wisdom, and courage, not cattle, coins, or land. The courtyard lay quiet, the morning sun spilling gold across the earth. The family, once consumed by greed and whispered schemes, stood in the hush of reflection. "Those who dance at another's grave forget the patience of the earth," the eldest elder said softly, his voice carrying the weight of generations. The words hung in the air like incense, a reminder that life and death move according to laws older than men. A daughter held her father's hand, eyes glistening. "Gold cannot replace the warmth of a human heart," she murmured, understanding at last that the treasures they had fought over could never buy love or respect. In the silence, the betrayals of the past spoke louder than any confession. Every glance, every avoidance, whispered the truth. Even when lips are sealed, the heart cannot hide its sins. The patriarch, seated beneath the shade of a spreading baobab, looked to the horizon. "Life returns when fate is not finished," he said, voice steady as the wind through the leaves. The family bowed, knowing that while riches may fade, wisdom, forgiveness, and second chances endure. The earth had waited, as patient as ever, and now, so had they.